We're halfway there, or through the summer break at least. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of F1 in Review. We're slap bang in the middle of the summer break and I'm told the season as well, and therefore this episode and hour we'll be looking back on our mid-season review of this season's drivers, seeing how they've done so far, who's excelled in terms of expectations, who's fighting to save their season, and who perhaps has a seat for next year but only by the skin of their teeth. Hello, I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review account where we post the episodes sporadically once they have gone out. So as with last time, for those who don't know, we'll be going down the Drivers' Championship as is currently, all the way from Verstappen to Latifi, working our way down and giving these drivers a rating out of 10 and saying who needs to do better, who's performed well, and where they can improve, all that sort of good stuff. So Tristan, I believe you have the ratings from last time. You'll be comparing then with now and seeing whether we've changed our mind or whether the drivers have gotten sort of worse or better, or maybe it's just a combination of all things really. But let's start off with the number one driver currently, the driver who's currently raking in the points and way ahead of second place, Max Verstappen. What do we think of him? How is he doing? What rating would we give him?
Can I point out, by the way, that we last did this on the 11th of April. So I have still the spreadsheet in front of me, and I recorded down our scores. If you haven't listened back to that episode, you should go back, because the driver order in which I have in front of me, but now in no way correlates to the driver order in which I can see online in terms of the driver standings. So much has happened, has it not, since the 11th of April. I feel like I was a more optimistic human in April. But Charles Leclerc, by the way, was leading back then. So we'll just quietly go to the other leader now, Verstappen, who I have in my spreadsheet in 7th place, by the way, or 6th place rather. So that's quite a large change. Look, at the time, I rated him a 9 out of 10. And to be honest, I think he so far has been a driver that has been the most consistent, I think. The stats for him are absolutely crazy this year. Just by the fact that he's on 258 points, I think it's going to be really easy. Because for me, I gave him a 9 then. I'm going to give him a 9 now. I think, to be honest, at this point, if he doesn't win the championship, I will be massively surprised. So yeah, I'll give him a solid 9. I always feel a bit wary giving someone a 10 out of 10, because I'll give him a 10 out of 10 and then in the next race they decide to give it a go driving backwards or something like that, and I'll look like a fool. So I gave him a 9 then, and I'm going to give him a 9 now.
Angus, what about you? You're new to this, I suppose, mid-season review, naming drivers out of 10, but what do you think of Verstappen so far?
I'm going to one-up Tristan. I say one-up, I'm going to half-up, I guess you could call it. I'll give him 9.5, because I genuinely think he has been almost flawless. Like, he's been so on it. He's been able to take advantage when Ferrari have messed up. He's done as good as he can in qualifying, considering he's not in the quickest car over one lap. His only real mistake that I can think of was the spin in Hungary, which he then went on to win anyhow. He's won both sprints. He's maximised every opportunity. His 2 retirements were due to technical failures early in the season. I mean, and he's got rid of. You've noticed this over the last couple of years. He used to have a bit of a hot-headedness about him, but I feel like he's really toned down. The World Championship he won last year has really sort of unleashed another level in him. So yeah, I genuinely, as much as Leclerc has been super speedy, and I think he deserves a high rating too, which we'll get onto. Verstappen for me, almost flawless, but like you said, a 10 is unachievable unless he wins every race and gets every pole position. So I'll give him a 9.5.
Yeah, I'm largely in agreement. 9 out of 10 I'll go for this time. I have no idea what I scored him last time, but I imagine it's pretty similar. Yeah, pretty flawless as well. I mean, the only times he hasn't won or hasn't done too well is owing more to reliability issues of some kind rather than his racecraft, which I think has shown a real maturity over this year, perhaps more so than last year and the seasons gone by, really. So not only does he have the right tools to finish the job, he's also got the right mindset and the capability, which we always knew he had. So yeah, I think we're all sorted there. Moving on to who was the leader of the championship last time we did this, as Tristan reminded us, Leclerc. What do you think of Charles Leclerc? How would he rate him now versus perhaps when we last did, at least?
Well, Tom, you gave him a 10 last time.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, you gave him a 10.
I shouldn't have done that.
How would you rate him now?
that is bad from me. In terms of Leclerc, I guess we're speaking around 7. I think 7 really.
Wow.
Because he's lacked consistency. He could be spectacular in Austria and then incredibly stupid in France and Imola, for example. And yes, you can go and say strategy's held him back, reliability's held him back. There's other things that are pulling against him, really, that he's having to ride against. And I understand that, but I think really my view of him and his racecraft has somewhat diminished compared to seasons gone by and when he burst onto the scene back in 2019 with Ferrari, because as I say, there's been many occasions where he has had the ability to wow us, but then also disappoint us with some basic elements. And when you consider that he's meant to be the next big thing and the man to go and take the fight to Verstappen, well, he's got a lot of that now in terms of the capability to do so, but he's not levelling him. He's not, in my view, he doesn't really have the ability right now to go toe-to-toe and beat him. I would put him in a inferior category to Verstappen, really. I remember the comparison was Verstappen being generational and Leclerc being box office. And I remember when I first heard that, I remember maybe from Tristan or Angus, I can't remember. But I remember when I heard that, I thought, oh, that's a bit harsh. That's a bit harsh. I'd put them largely in the same bracket. But unfortunately, not right now. But I imagine that Leclerc will redeem himself come many races in years to come this sport.
I think 7's harsh, personally. I admit he's not been at his absolute brilliant best all the time. But I still think there's a hugely precocious talent in there, which has shown such incredible raw speed this year. You could make an argument for Leclerc. I know he's got a faster car, for sure, over one lap, but you could make an argument for him being the fastest driver over one lap in Formula 1 at the moment. I think he's that quick, he's that good. And for me, that stunning pace, which he's translated into some victories, but not enough. But then also the not enough has an asterisk in it, which is that Ferrari can't strategise. So I'd say that for me, I'm leaning towards an 8 because I still think he's been stunningly quick, and I think some of his individual errors are things which I know the inexperienced excuse is easy, and you can say he's been in the sport 5 years, which he has, or 4.5 at least. But like, he's still young, he's still got time, and I think that his raw pace is just incredible and means that when he does finally cut out those errors, he could be a scary, scary beast of a driver. So for me, based on the first half of the season and the raw speed he's shown and the fact that he has overall been more consistent than lots of other drivers still, I'm going to give him an 8.
I think 8's a pretty good score. I'm still weighing up. I think even now. I've been thinking about this for a while with Leclerc. Tom, your comments about I think it came from Angus originally. Generational is Max Verstappen and box office for Leclerc. I feel like Charles Leclerc is box office. I feel like at the moment he's kind of like the Batgirl film. The one that got cancelled because it had the hype behind it of being quite a great film. And then Warner Brothers cancelled the film because of their strategic vision. And I feel like Ferrari has kind of cancelled Leclerc's box office appearance because of their strategic vision or lack thereof. And so I feel like that's stacked against Leclerc a little bit, actually. And I don't want that to take away from my score. And you make really good points, because like, France was a terrible moment for Leclerc, dropping it into the barriers, and in that moment, I guess, being unable to save it. At the end of the day, Max Verstappen made a mistake and he managed to save it and win, whereas Leclerc's one was just that next step worse. And it's not just in Formula 1 either. Even at the Monaco historic Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc, maybe has a bit of foreshadowing perhaps of his experience at Monaco over the last few years, crashed Niki Lauda's Ferrari. And I feel like that's the thing about Leclerc at the moment. He's absolutely able to get into the lead and has that moments of absolute magic. But it's kind of sporadic and inconsistent. It's like if your colleague always needed 3 cups of coffee and a sandwich to be at their very best. Yeah, that's great. You could definitely hand them something to complete in the middle of the day, but would you want to rely on them? Probably not. And I feel like Charles Leclerc at the moment has just not got that level of consistency. So I'm gonna be nicer. I think I'm gonna agree with Angus. I'm gonna say an 8. I mean, I gave him a 10 last time, so this is what I mean. I give them a 10, and what did they do? They just demonstrate how I'm wrong. So I've given him an 8 in the hope that yet again Charles Leclerc makes me look like a fool and has an amazing second half of the season. But we're all fans of Leclerc. That's the thing. None of us want him to fail. It's quite the opposite. I want him to do well. And it's unfortunate that he has a fantastic combination at the moment of being slightly inconsistent in himself and also having Ferrari, which is sabotage from the inside.
Moving down to third place, the Mexican that's but 5 points behind Leclerc, Sergio Perez. What do you think about him? Has he perhaps failed to kick on from his last sort of review, shall we say, or when he was last but a few points off Max Verstappen, bearing down on him, looking like he could be the one who stole the crown from the Dutchman?
Angus, Tom gave him last time an 8/9. You said you couldn't really make up your mind. How does that sit with you?
I would say that is, if we're talking about the whole season, it's generous. But I can see why that rating was given after what was a great injection of pace from Perez at the start of the season with his pole in Saudi Arabia, which realistically none of us saw coming, and his consistent performances. But I think overall, Sergio Perez, when I think of him, he screams the word consistency, which is no bad thing at all in Formula 1. Don't get me wrong. And I think it's his consistency, which means he's now just 5 points behind Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship. So for me, when I think consistency in terms of rating, I think 7. I think if I'm giving 8 to Leclerc, I think I'm giving 7 to Perez, because yes, he's looked quicker than last year. Yes, he did win in Monaco, and yes, he's got 4 other podiums, which have all been second place, most of them to his teammate. Creating great results for the Red Bull team, but has he always looked like a victory contender in most races like Leclerc and Verstappen have? Or even Sainz has on a couple of occasions? Not for me. And I think that something's changed in recent months, and whether it's a deliberate car setup ploy by Red Bull, the conspiracies rage on about that, he's just not been as on Verstappen's pace as he was at the start of the season. Now again, no bad things. Verstappen is lightning. But for me, Perez is doing a better job than last season, hence why I'd go with a 7 rather than say a 6 or a 6.5. So it's definitely a respectable rating still for me, 7 out of 10.
What about you, Tristan?
I don't know. Perez is a really interesting one, because I've been touting his brilliance, I think, actually quite a lot, and I kind of stand by what I've said. For a while, I thought Perez, and maybe I still do think Perez is Verstappen's biggest rival, but unfortunately that's kind of been blown out the water by the fact that Verstappen just stormed off. Do you remember when we were like, Verstappen and Perez are only like 30 points between them, this is amazing, that was sort of the midpoint between the first half of the season. I really should just say quarter then rather than halving and halving again. Apologies if I'm making you do maths at home, but yeah, that was during the first sort of between the first quarter and the first half of the season, and I feel like Perez, for whatever reason, has been slowly sliding back. But then it's all very difficult to measure this, because the other thing is Perez might well be very, very consistent. It's just everyone else is getting better, which is it was something we can never measure. That we're into the realms of speculation there. But we can be on no doubt that Perez has done things like won a race this year, which makes him pretty good. And that's where I think he would sit in my mind, just pretty good. And so I'm going to stick with my 8, which I gave him last time. But that does put him on the same level as Leclerc, so take from that what you will. But I feel like Perez is being boosted up by the fact that the Red Bull team underneath him is actually doing quite well, whereas Leclerc is sort of being brought down, if you like, in the other direction.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For context, I would now give him a 7.5 out of 10.
Ooh,
think of that where you will. Because I feel he's a very consistent driver in terms of you can always rely on him to get some decent points, but the best of him you only ever see in patches. We saw that between Austria and Monaco. He was incredible, looking like he had the ability to take the fight to Verstappen and to beat him, man for man type thing. But since then he's really tailed off in terms of the points. Also there's been some reliability issues as well, but we haven't seen the same Perez of past. And you could go and say, oh, okay, maybe that's setup issues, maybe that's something else going on. But we saw this as well, didn't we, in the season just gone, where Perez wasn't too consistent in terms of being up there with Verstappen until the very end. Of course, that was so important in many aspects when it came to that title fight for Verstappen. But we once again saw the pattern emerging of good, brilliant, and good again, which I think we're seeing again. And it feeds, I think, or my rating feeds into the fact that he was in a position to challenge Verstappen. He wasn't the ability, or had the chance at least, to give Red Bull a headache more than Leclerc did, for example. Yes, he was being constrained, but he hasn't been able to do that. That being said, he's done a lot better than last season, and I think he could and probably will at this rate finish in P2 overall, and to do that against a very, very good Ferrari team with Leclerc and Sainz, who I think are two of the best drivers on the grid, is no mean feat really. So maybe 7.5 is a bit harsh, but it's all the context of where we were, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you Google Sergio Perez at the moment, Angus was telling me earlier that there was a headline which was Sergio Wolf breaks silence on Sergio Perez replacing Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, and I think that those sort of gotcha headlines, those clickbait is what you use, Angus. You said that clickbait headlines are very amusing, because I think with someone like Sergio Perez, I can't put him on the same level as like someone like Lewis Hamilton. I think, again, he falls into the unfortunate place, and I think that's been driven a bit more this season, as definitely brilliant, but unfortunately is having to drive next to someone incredible. Hands up if that sounds familiar to a certain Valtteri Bottas. And I think Valtteri has demonstrated to us that we have to, I think, be kind to people like Perez and maybe even Carlos Sainz, which I'm sure is coming up very, very soon. He says, looking at the driver standings, because we can't forget that he's driving with someone who beat so many records. He is Max Verstappen holds the acclaim to be the youngest ever Formula One winner. Won for Red Bull in his opening Grand Prix with Red Bull after he got promoted halfway through his season from Toro Rosso. Max Verstappen is, as you say, generational. So I think we need to be a bit kind to Sergio Perez and remember that he's still smashing records. For Mexican drivers and things like that. It's just he happens to be standing in the footprints of someone with maximum feet. I'm trying to get a Max pun in there, by the way. I'm not sure if that was successful.
No, I think that was fine. Yeah. And speaking about another driver who's perhaps in the shadow, or at least was in the shadow of a greater Formula One, George Russell. He's next on the list, and I'll come straight out of the blocks. 9 out of 10 for Mr. Russell. How does that compare?
Wow, you gave him a 9 out of 10 in April. Which
well,
makes,
look at me.
Yeah, well done. So, yeah, you obviously predicted that very well. Congratulations. Why were you giving him a 9 out of 10, Mr. Tom? I feel like I'm interviewing you.
Well, Mr. Tristan, he hasn't really put a foot wrong. I mean, yes, of course, there was that DNF, but that was largely owing to the start of the race and that horrible crash with Guan Yu Zhou, which I think would be very harsh to go and say that was George Russell's fault. And when you consider that he's finished in every other race and finished no lower than P5, that is quite incredible, really. And he's also been wrestling with a very tough car in the first quarter of the season. Since then, we've really seen that car push on and him push on as well. P1 qualifying, at least in Hungary, was quite remarkable. I think, at the start of the season, there was some critics surrounding him, fueled perhaps by the Drive to Survive series of was he good enough, was he the right man to partner Lewis Hamilton? Could he replace Valtteri Bottas without upsetting the apple cart type thing? And he's done that in terms of not upsetting the apple cart and then also doing a great job in terms of racing as well. And let's not forget he's way ahead of Lewis Hamilton, his teammate who was driving in the same car as him in his first season for Mercedes, his first season in a really competitive car. It's difficult to say George Russell has done anything wrong so far this season.
I'm torn between 8 and 8.5 for me. I think that it would be higher if he hadn't recently ceded a bit more grounds to Hamilton in both races and qualifying. Recent results have gone more in Hamilton's favour, which, to be fair, actually thinking about it, we kind of expected that from day dot. So it's actually probably not a bad thing that it's gone against him recently. Like, you feel that Hamilton would have inevitably made the ground up had he started on the back foot. But yeah, I keep calling him George like he's a mate or something, but we'll roll with it. George has produced consistency in both qualifying and the races. Strings of good finishes. The increased pace of the Mercedes car means those good finishes have turned more and more into podiums in recent races. It's looking like a very good foundation for what could be a very promising and very fulfilling Mercedes career going forward. The team clearly, as much as he was going up against the 7-time world champion and he was going in as just the one-time podium finisher at Williams, having had 3 years under his belt there, realistically, everyone at Mercedes wants him to succeed. They don't want a Hamilton-Rosberg battle. They want something where Hamilton can stick around for a few years, keep up the high levels, Russell can learn from him, so that when Hamilton retires and Russell has to lead the team, they hope they'll have an absolute monster in Russell to take over the reins. And I think I'll go for an 8.5. The one thing which I reckon would turn me into a 9 would be if George could get that race win ticked off later on in the year. And based on the increasing pace of the car that he has, I think there's an ever-increasing possibility that may happen. But so far, I'll give him 8.5. Slightly higher than Leclerc.
8.5 is a solid shout, I think. And, I mean, I'm going to go up a little bit more. I'm going to give him a 9.5. And the thing is, I think, we've been touting George Russell's brilliance for a very, very long time, and there were moments of problems for him in his career, like trying to boot up Valtteri Bottas in a naughty. We don't do that now, George, and and especially when he had that run off very nearly in points. I can think of Mugello when he was running in the points and then he fell out of it, and then of course he got into the points and then everything sort of settled down. Now he steadied the ship, and then this year was going to be make or break. George Russell, the British rookie, versus Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time champion of the world, breaking records like they are. I don't know what breaks really easily. Plates. Yeah, let's go with that. Breaking records like they're plates, smashing them easy peasy, and so. If anyone's ever started a new job, you get imposter syndrome, that feeling where you don't quite belong. And I feel like George has had probably one of the biggest levels of imposter syndrome, at least I would have thought, going up against all that. And this year, he has absolutely just stormed out the block. Look, he was second in the driver's standings on the 11th of April, according to my spreadsheet in front of me. We gave him a 9 back then. And he took a pole position this year in that Mercedes in the dry. Yes, he ceded some space to Lewis Hamilton, but that's partly because of Mercedes' own strategies. Let's not forget. I mean, and I feel like George has been a demonstration of responsible wheel-to-wheel racing, consistency. At the very beginning of the season, he was one of the very few drivers to have completed every single race without in the points. His DNF came from the fact that he stopped this year to check that people were all right at the British Grand Prix, so he couldn't get it back on his own power. That there's more to a driver than pure stats, I think. And whilst Max is brilliant in terms of just his raw pace, I think George brings, to some extent, the whole package. There is that incredible consistency there. He's also, I think, a pretty nice bloke as well, which helps. So I'm going to give him a 9.5, and partly because we have to be a little bit compassionate and use emotions. And I think George is quite an emotive driver. When he got pole position, I was shouting at the TV in a way that I haven't done for ages. It just blindsided everyone. I think we're all rooting for George, absolutely. And again, I cannot concede that he's going to do badly by the end of the season. At the moment, he's on 158 points, which is beating Carlos Sainz. And yeah, Hamilton might well beat him to 4th place, but to be honest, that's to be expected. George Russell, for me, is turning out to be one of the highlights of the season to watch.
Mm-hmm. I think if we'd asked any of us, come the midpoint in the season, would George Russell A, be ahead of Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz, or B, behind, I think we'd have all comfortably gone option B, definitely. There's no chance he's going to be ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Then also Carlos Sainz, who started the season so well and is in that Ferrari car. But yes, so it is. Carlos Sainz, I'm giving him a 7.5 out of 10. I think he's lacked consistency. We saw the greatness in him at Silverstone, but then also the basic errors at Melbourne Park, Australia, for example. He's started to improve, done a good job so far. Surprised a few, I think. I think there's still a few out there who don't believe he's in the same league as Leclerc, despite him actually beating him last season. But I think he should be higher in that leaderboard, and it comes back to the fact that, yes, there's been strategy issues, reliability issues out of his control. I think there are a few driver errors still left in him that needs to be chalked out, shall we say, and improved on for him to really get the full potential out of himself and then also out of the car as well.
Yeah, I agree, and similarly, I rate him quite similar to Sainz and Perez. I rate quite similar. I think they've had relatively consistent season and also comparable seasons as well this year. Clearly, they're both racing against someone else who's the champion, or they're sort of champion-esque sort of individual fighting for the World Championship. And they both had the opportunities for poles, race wins. They both had their fair share of problems. I think they kind of both match each other quite well. So I'm going to also give him, because you gave him, by the way, Tom, 7.5 as you did Carlos Sainz.
Oh, look at me.
I know. I'm also going to give him the same as I gave Carlos Sainz. So I gave Perez an 8. I'm going to give Sainz an 8 as well. I think he's done a good job holding his own against Charles Leclerc. I mean, last year he beat Charles Leclerc, and you might say, well, that's just because of the problems for Charles Leclerc. But hey, looks like history's repeating itself. So, all you Charles Leclerc fans, I'm afraid you might look and see Sainz beat him again. But, ask us again in another 2 quarters of a season.
I'm going to say 7.5. I'm basing it on the ones I've done so far. And if Charles Leclerc is an 8 for being blindingly quick with making a few errors, and Sergio Perez is a 7 for being consistent but not exactly at the front all the time, I think Sainz has to be a 7.5 for being consistent, not being as quick as his teammates, but being at the front and ready to take advantage on more occasions. Think of times where, if we take away his win for a second, his second place finishes this season have come from 2 of them behind Red Bull, behind Perez in Monaco, and behind Verstappen in Canada, where he was pressuring right at the end. You could say he should have got the win there. He's also been on the bad luck end of some retirements, such as in Austria when the engine decided to self-immolate, and then also in Azerbaijan where the engine conked out. And yes, I'd say he wouldn't be an 8 simply because of the individual errors. Australia and Imola... Well, actually, no, I take that back. Imola wasn't his fault, but Australia definitely was an individual error when trying to get up through the field quickly. But other times he's been blindingly quick. Silverstone, he was super consistent and took advantage when he needed to. So for that, I couldn't rate him higher than the same as Leclerc, and I couldn't rate him the same as Perez. So ideally, I've got them slap bang in the middle. So 7.5 for me.
And we now go on to the man who just missed out on his 8th World Championship, Lewis Hamilton. He's not had a great season so far, but how do we rate him?
This is really difficult to rate him, isn't it? And did we struggle last time as much? I think I might have, because I gave him sort of an 8 mark, and I think I did that because he's Lewis Hamilton. And I sort of stand by that. It is Lewis Hamilton, and he's had a rough old season, hasn't he? He's gone from starting behind... both his teammate and ex-teammate on starting alongside Valtteri Bottas. Do you remember at the very beginning of the season having his first non-points finish? Lewis Hamilton has had an absolute rollercoaster of the season, and yet, is still collecting enough points to be in 6th place. Only 10 points behind Carlos Sainz, 12 points behind his teammate. And so judging where Hamilton is really, really difficult, especially as he is working tirelessly to get better in that car, and also the car is working to break his back. So it's an absolutely really tricky one to tell where he is. I think Lewis is doing really well actually this season, and I think I stand by that 8 mark. But I haven't seen... I haven't really seen too much magic moments from him. I think the highlight has been watching Hamilton on the soft tyres at Hungary basically get released and fight back through to get 3rd place and fight against his teammate. And that was an incredible moment watching George and Hamilton fighting for podium positions. And we saw then, I think, the way Lewis Hamilton sort of managed his strategy and worked with Mercedes rekindled that idea that they are a formidable force. I think we've forgotten that parts during the season that Hamilton and Mercedes work in such a way that they can pull these strategies out like it's easy, and it really isn't easy, and they make it look really easy. And yes, there has been moments where it's been funny to see Hamilton moaning about porpoising, or you might think, he came 15th, and he's been what's the point? I want to give up. He's even said on the radio, let's give up now. It is a different Hamilton this year to that we had last year, but to be honest, it's a new season of Formula One, a new era of the cars. And so I think Hamilton this year has somehow grown to be even better. And I've missed watching him fight in a car that's not necessarily fantastic out of the gate. Anyone who's been on Twitter saying, "Wow, Hamilton's only brilliant because of the car," has been shut up, I think, this year, as we've watched him have to deal with a car that's not so brilliant. And I've missed his ruthlessness. The way he battles is amazing, and we've had so much entertainment from that. So yeah, I'm going to give him an 8. I think he's been let down by the fact the car hasn't been very good, but Lewis Hamilton is still reinforcing the fact that he is, for me, one of the greatest drivers of the in the world ever. And I think currently still best on the grid, but that might well change one day. But I think for me, Lewis Hamilton has to be given the respect this season to be up there with other fantastic drivers such as Charles Leclerc, who I gave an 8 to as well.
This is a tricky one, because I think we're going to have to get used to the idea now of Hamilton is... I was about to say Hamilton's old, man. But to be fair, in Formula 1 terms, he is. And he won't ever... When I think of Hamilton's season, I don't think of like a standout moment where you think, wow, that was incredible. He's just been slowly dragging himself back up, being more consistent as the season's gone on. and it's made his. And I don't want to rate him based on the idea of recency bias, because if you looked at the last 5 races, I wouldn't be surprised if in the last 5 races he's got more points than any other driver based on his run of results then. And I don't want to base my rating on more recent events. Across the whole season, we have to admit he started very poorly by his high standards. He struggled to get to grip with the car. His first 4 races were 3rd, 10th, 4th and 13th in the races. That Saudi race and that Imola race, both absolute stinkers as far as I'm concerned. And I can't recall Russell having really a stinker of a race. I can't recall Sainz having a real stinker of a race. Perez, not massively either. And Hamilton, you could also say never write him off, and I think that's fair because he's really come back strong in terms of race pace and consistency in the last few races in a car which, other than Russell's shock pole in Budapest, is clearly better over a longer distance than it is over one lap. So, again, I'm comparing. But if I was to give Perez a 7, Sainz a 7.5, and Leclerc an 8, I'd be leaning towards a 7. Yeah, I'm going to say it. It may seem harsh, but I'm saying 7 for Hamilton. Simply because he had a patch at the start of the season, and we're doing the whole season here so far, and he had a patch where he was really off it and he struggled. And yes, of course, he's done brilliant to bring it back, but I can't give him higher than a 7 without clear conscience, I'd say.
Interesting. What did I give Hamilton last time, Tristan?
Last time you gave him a 7, so you and Angus seem to be on the same page, I think, which is bizarre. Did you think you'd be giving him a 7?
No, I think this time round, I don't know, I'm giving him a 6.5, you know. Giving him 6.5 because there's no doubt he's a quality driver, one of the best, if not the best of all time. But we're judging this in terms of from top to bottom of the Drivers' Championship so far. And we can't escape the fact that, yes, the car is very tough to drive. Yes, there's been improvements recently. But he is still P6, 12 points off his teammate, who's the debutant in the same car that he's driving. And while there's reason to be cheerful, Canada to Hungary being good examples of this, and there's no doubt that he still has his talent and he hasn't lost it, you've got to look in terms, I suppose, of context and expectation, which I think we rabbited on so much around last time when we spoke about Lewis Hamilton and reviewing him. But we expect a lot more than P6 and 12 points of his teammate. And maybe that's wrong of us to do so, or at least myself. Obviously, he set the bar so high. He's a 7-time driver championship for a reason. But when you set the bar that high and then fall down, and then talk about quitting in terms of, quitting the race and start, sort of reeling off the same, I suppose, whining and excuses without reaping the same results, you go, it's a bit differently in my view. So because of that, and because he's performing below par and below the very high bar he's set, it's got to be a 6.5. But I have no doubt, looking at the last few races, that he's turning up the volume and will get on the top step of that podium by hook or by crook this season at the very least. But yeah, it's not been great, but nothing personal, just the bar is set.
6.5.
Yeah.
6.5. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, are you sure? Because
I am.
I mean, you gave Gasly a 6.
Oh, well, you got a storm coming there as well, so don't worry about that.
Tom's just downgrading everybody.
I'm obviously in a very mean mood when I wrote these notes, but
I mean, all the Hamilton fans are stopping the podcast now, thinking I'm not gonna listen, and wow.
They'll just skip me,
Just couldn't believe 6.5. I can't believe we're talking about Hamilton being a 6.5. I just think, that's middling. 65%. Is he a 2-1?
Nothing wrong with a 2-1. Come on. Yeah. And then going from one Brit to a younger Brit, Lando Norris. Thoughts on him?
I think Norris has had a stonking season, personally. I think that over his career, we forget, by the way, that over his 4-year career, he's been up against Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo as teammates. And he initially struggled a bit against Sainz back at the very start. But then he grew into it. It was really, those two, we couldn't separate them throughout the 2020 season, realistically. They were like neck and neck, both in race pace and qualifying pace. And that Carlos Sainz is now a race winner and a top driver at Ferrari. And Lando Norris is 5 years younger than him, and he's performing at the level he's at and he's been in Formula 1 now 4 years, and he'll only be 23 when the season ends. He has, I can't think of any other word other than dispatched Daniel Ricciardo. Absolutely dispatched him. McLaren have 95 points this year, and Norris has 80% of those, up against a 7-time Grand Prix winner who used to beat Max Verstappen in the same car. Like, I think obviously everyone gushes over Russell, but I think people underestimate how good Norris is. And he's had an incredible season. The only driver outside the top 3 teams to get podium in Imola. Yes, extenuating circumstances. Mercedes weren't as quick then. Leclerc binned it. Sainz was punted out on the opening lap. But still, you got to bring it home. He's a model of consistency. It's a McLaren car which has gone backwards compared to last year, based on the fact that they are nowhere near Ferrari anymore, and they're also chasing their tail with Alpine hot on it. So for me, for him to produce the results he has, and so comprehensively dispatch his teammate, what did I give the others? If Russell's an 8.5 and Leclerc's an 8, for me Norris has to be an 8 as well. Norris has just been a modicum of consistency in a car which I'm sure he wishes was better. But yeah, I think he's had a phenomenal season personally. So 8 out of 10. And I say phenomenal and then I give him 8, but like based with the car he has, the performances he's doing, I think he's doing brilliantly. So 8 out of 10 for me. If you had to name me my top 4 drivers so far this season, I'd go Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Norris. So that reflects my ratings there, I'd say.
I'll give him a 7. I think he's not done too much wrong in a very tough car to drive versus last year. As you say there, dispatched his teammate Ricciardo, but that is just par for the course at this rate, isn't it? But then also he hasn't hit the heights, I think, of last season, which I suppose you've got to look at it in context of the car. But I suppose, once again, similar to Hamilton, we're used to see him fighting up there for the final plinth of the podium type thing. And I suppose him only doing that once at Imola, compared to so many times last season, does take the sheen off his achievement, which I think is easy to sort of disregard. You go, oh, okay, well, he's not on the podium as he was. He's consistently getting points in P6 and 7. And that's a downgrade, which I think is wrong. But once again, if we're judging this by the leaderboard in terms of the driver's leaderboard, then you've got to say, in my view, he's only worthy of a 7.
I find Norris really, really hard to rank because I'm still running off, I think, last year, and it's very difficult because Norris I think has proved himself yet again this year, and McLaren as well has had a real problem. I mean, their car was terrible at the beginning of the year, back of the grid level poor. I was sitting there thinking, right, all these new sponsors that they got are going to run away. Do you remember they did that big announcement at the very beginning of the year saying that they had new chrome wheels, which was Google Chrome, and I was thinking, well, you've got chrome wheels now, but you stay like this, Google's going to be running off. And I think they have definitely made improvements, and that's helped Norris. Norris has totally, as you say, devastatingly proved himself to be a better driver this year than Ricciardo. So good, not just dispatched, but also perhaps also managed to displace him as well, if the rumours are correct. Rumour has it. Well, I guess we'll come on to that when we talk about Ricciardo. Nice to weave some news into there. But I think Norris is he's at McLaren now. He's not going anywhere. That he is currently the McLaren's version of Charles Leclerc, George Russell. And in a competitive car, could I see Norris winning a race? Yeah, absolutely I could. He very nearly did. If you hark back to the heart-wrenching Russian Grand Prix last year when it rained 3 laps before the end and poor Norris, so desperate to win, decided to not go for wet tyres when it was raining. And that was a real hard lesson for him, and unfortunately the hard lessons come around often in Formula 1. But hopefully he learned from them. And I hope Norris will have the opportunity to prove himself as a race winner very, very, very soon. And I think he will. But I don't think I can quite rank him as high. Looking at what I've done so far and where we've got to go to as well. I think I'd say he's in that sort of best of the rest zone. So given everything else, I'm going to give him gonna give him a 7. I think he's my first 7. I don't think I can rate him highly, but according to my rating, that makes him better than Lewis Hamilton, according to Tom.
And we go down one more to Esteban Ocon, currently the only driver at Alpine. Our thoughts on him?
Oh dear. I think Ocon's been doing quite well. I think I could be quite quick with this one. I gave him a 7, and I'm gonna give him a 7 as well. I think Ocon's holding his own. He's in my F1 fantasy team, so take from that what you will. He has been, well, just a relatively consistent driver. I think his drive is secure at Alpine. I don't know whether or not he'll be the first or second driver next year when they decide to pick someone. Because currently Ocon is driving both cars, 1 foot in each one. Maybe Alpine need to ask McLaren for some drivers, because it seems like everyone's driving for McLaren at the moment, or in Ricciardo's case, perhaps not. But Ocon, I would say, is a 7. Unfortunately, I keep forgetting he exists, which is a good thing. Because he crosses the line. You go, congratulations, Ocon came in 6th place. There you go. I think that's brilliant. But also, he is not doing anything to particularly wow me as well. Apart from, I think him and Alonso have had some spicy races this year, and have been very close to taking each other out, and have been causing each other some sort of damage within the team, which might have contributed to Alonso leaving. But other than that, I think Ocon has had a steady head and absolutely deserving of his 8th place. But we're slipping quite far down now. Once you deal with the top 3 teams, then best of the rest is sort of Norris, and Ocon is quite a way behind him. There's 18 points between Norris and Ocon, so I'm going to give him about the same as I gave of Norris. I'm going to give him a 7, but I think he's been a pretty steady Eddie this year.
Yeah, I'd give him a 7.5. I think he's been really consistent in terms of points finishes as well. He's reflected in that. Beating Alonso as well by 17 points, the multi-world time champion. And we're told how good he is and how he's going to bring the team forward, Alonso that is. But now you're seeing Ocon beat him, and beat him convincingly. Be happy and be willing and be able to go and beat him in a sort of wheel-to-wheel race and take the game to him type of thing, and not be overawed by the fact that, it's Alonso, got to play his game type thing. So I think he's done really well. I think he's proving the doubters wrong, because I feel that when Alonso came in and when Ricciardo was at Renault and soon will return probably, there was a lot of question marks over Ocon of he's not good enough to lead the team. He DNFs too much because of reliability issues. There's a reason he was kicked out in the Mercedes Academy and wasn't given the promotion over Russell. And I understand that I don't think he's in the same league as George Russell, but it's a clear reason why he was in that academy to start with. I think he was wrongly dumped, shall we say, by Racing Point, owing to one reason and another, which he talked about in previous episodes. But he's showing his worth, really, and I think that he has the ability to go toe-to-toe with someone like Norris, with Bottas, who's below him, beating Alonso as well, and, beat them pound for pound when the chips are down and when things are running in the right direction. I'm concerned for him, however, moving forward when it comes to him being at Alpine, because Alpine need to go and sort out the house pretty quickly, otherwise they're going to be left with a driver that's lagging behind him, and yes, that's good for Ocon in a personal sense, but not so good when it comes to the constructors.
Ocon's a difficult one for me because his points tally reflects very well on him, and I almost feel like he's actually upped his game, one, since the win, which is inevitable realistically probably, but also since his long-term future was tied down. I feel like that's made him a lot more of a grounded and better polished driver in some way or another. But then he has been overshadowed by Alonso in overall pace. And whilst it is Fernando Alonso, for sure, and we've talked about him plenty in recent podcasts, he is being beaten on pace by a 41-year-old. The bloke's 15 years older than him. It doesn't reflect massively well. And whilst the points tallies reflect positively for Ocon, he's had some strong races for sure. He's had many consistent top 7 finishes. I think it was Tristan who said he sort of goes under the radar, but he doesn't really stand out. He's like Mr. Understated on the Formula One grid.
Cousin to Mr.
And I can't give him. Again, I'm comparing my previous ones. What was my Perez was a 7, so I'd say Ocon. I'm gonna give Ocon a 6. It feels harsh, but
come
six
on,
for 6 for Ocon. Yeah, 6.
This is coming from, I'm going to give Lewis Hamilton a 6.5.
Yeah, that's true.
6.5, not a 6. Fuming. Right. And we go down one more rung on the ladder. Valtteri Bottas had a new team, Alfa Romeo. I've given him a 7.5 out of 10. I think now he's at the shadow of Lewis Hamilton. He's showing his worth, or is at least done in patches. He's leading the team very well. I think obviously he was always going to beat the debutant of Zhou and is doing that very well. But I still feel he should be slightly higher in the table than he should be. He's tailed off really in the last 4 races. Really came out of the traps as we saw at the start of the season. Qualifying ahead of Lewis Hamilton. DNF'd once owing to reliability issues in the first sort of handful of races, but since then he's got out of the points. But if you were to, I suppose we will find out what my rating was before this, but when you consider that the last time we did this he was in the points in all but 1 or 2 occasions, versus now, well, that's crept up to unfortunately 6. You've got to go, things are unfortunately tailing off again for Bottas, and it's a shame to see really, but good start, but consistency is the key, as they say.
You gave him an 8.
An 8. Okay. I think that reflects it then. Yeah, but his form's dropped as well, so, win some, you lose some.
Has it really dropped, though? Because the thing is, at the very beginning of the season, we had a low sample rate of races, but I would say that Bottas has been pretty good and has still been, holding his own. He's had a few reliability issues, but to be in 9th place with only 12 points less than Ocon in, let's face it, an Alfa Romeo, do you not think that's a bit more deserving of a higher grade? Just looking at what you've given other people. Lewis Hamilton getting a 6.5, Leclerc getting a 7.
God, that's really put the cat amongst the pigeons, doesn't it, that one?
Well, what about the 7 for Charles Leclerc?
What about it?
Well, I mean, you're rating Bottas with Charles Leclerc, effectively.
Yes, but then again, I'd say my expectations for Leclerc were higher than my expectations were for Bottas. And as I say, Bottas has tailed off a bit, really, in the last few races. I mean, we talk around all the circumstances that afflict drivers, but we are judging this, as I say so many times, on the current standings of the Drivers' Championship, and that is how we're going to judge them by the end. And it's not been a great last few races for Valtteri, unfortunately, but I suppose my expectations were a bit lower. Hence, I gave him an 8, and I give him a 7.5 now.
That's fair enough. I mean, I'm also giving him a 7.5, but I feel like my 7.5 is I gave him an 8 as well, back when we first did it. But I feel like this is again reinforcing his greatness. Actually, last year and over the years, we've been quick to mock Valtteri Bottas, and especially as he has been. I think we've called him things like Mr. Beige because he's so consistent and a bit of a boring driver. But this year he's had those shackles released, and I think he's been doing actually very, very well. It's been nice to watch Bottas hold his own. He's been consistently getting to Q3 in an Alfa Romeo. He's been consistently fighting nicely with other people in, let's say, an Alfa Romeo. Bottas, I think, and I said this back when we did this in April, has been incredibly tactical this year. He's allowing others to fight, and then he just, look, who's coming out in the background? It's Valtteri Bottas. He is always there. That's what I seem to think. He's always there. Whenever we're in that midfield battle, consistently, Bottas is there. It's not like Lance Stroll, where you're like, what the hell? Why is Stroll? Oh, he's being overtaken. I see. When you see Bottas fighting or with the fight, it's because he's there, because he's fast. And I think Bottas, we came out the gates gun blazing because everyone else was so rubbish. It felt like that at the beginning of the season. It felt like everyone who was supposed to be good just forgot that they were supposed to be good. And everyone who was not supposed to be as good forgot that they were not supposed to be as good. I mean, at the beginning of the season, we had Haas at one point being like 4th in the constructors. Remember, Magnussen got 5th place. We had Bottas fighting with the Mercedes in his Alfa Romeo. Right, the beginning of the season was absolutely mental. I feel like at the end of this, I'm going to have to watch the whole beginning bit over again, because I feel like it's been a season of 2 parts, and that comes from the fact that we're in a new era with new type of downforce on the cars with the ground effect. And so I'm less down about giving him a 7.5. Like, Bottas should be really praised, and I'm ranking him higher than Norris. I'm ranking him higher than Ocon. You know, I'm ranking him slightly lower than Leclerc. I feel that's fair. I think Bottas, as a driver, given his equipment, has made way more of an impact than Ocon and Norris, and has not only earned my respect again as a fantastic driver, but, you know, an apology for thinking that he was just Mr. Beige this whole time, let alone all the other fun things he's been doing outside of Formula 1 as well, like printing off pictures of him in the river. I don't know if you've seen that picture yet, and ordering that for charity. You know, Bottas has turned into such a wonderful meme this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does in the second half of the season, especially as there is some good Alfa Romeo upgrades on the way. So I'm optimistic that Bottas holds on to his 9th place. But to be honest, even if he finishes 10th, you know, ahead of Alonso, who's in an Alpine, then I think he'll be able to hold his head up quite high and also demonstrate a return to form from Alfa Romeo, which is always nice for us, because Sauber, FYI, is reportedly making deals with I think Porsche. So there is some rumours about them coming in as well. So Bottas, I feel like, has got leveraged himself into a really good position this year.
I've literally spent the last 5-6 minutes thinking about what to give him based on these discussions. I'm going to give him a 7. So for me, that puts him on a par with Perez and Hamilton for me. Now, I think that Bottas has had a brilliant season. I think he came out the blocks absolutely on fire. That fire has been doused a little bit, I will not lie, but I think that's more down to the fact that a team like Alfa Romeo, realistically, its best chance of gaining points will be early on when other teams are still finding their feet. If they get their stuff together, which they did this season, and Bottas especially did. He was really, really on it from the start of the season. After Canada, they had 51 points from 9 races. Bear in mind, last year, in the whole of the year, they had like 5 points across 21 races. So a real hell of an improvement. It's just the last 4 races they've been left behind a bit. They got no points. Their cars slowed down. It's dropped down the pecking order. And I think that is more down to the car and the lack of the budget cap restricting their amount of development, rather than Bottas suddenly not knowing how to drive the car. So for me, it's a 7, simply because, he's really doing well in that environment. As much as his teammate is a rookie, he's beating his teammate convincingly, and you've got to beat what's in front of you. So whilst I wouldn't put him on like the level of a Carlos Sainz, I'd put him on, based on performance relative to car and how they've achieved, I'd put him with Perez and Hamilton. I'm comfortable doing that. 7 out of 10.
And we now get to the halfway point in the Drivers' Championship, the man who's in between cars. Fernando Alonso, what do we think?
It's so good that he's been poached by Aston Martin.
Yeah.
He is such an icon now, I think, up there with people like, Michael Schumacher. Might not have had necessarily the same achievements, but just darn good racer.
Yeah, I agree with that. 7.5, bit of a slow start to the season, not owing to his ability or racecraft, shall we say, but he's been very consistent since Miami. But I think that all of us expected him to be slightly higher in the table, and yes, there's been issues that have held him back there, but still to be behind your teammates by 17 points and to be only sort of halfway in the table, a sort of teapot driver, is not ideal, is it really? So he's hoping for him he'll be able to get up that table, but I fear that come next season, as we say, 10th will probably be his peak if he gets there at all. And so ends episode 25 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this episode, part 1 of our mid-season drivers review. Whether you've listened on your preferred podcast provider or River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature, thank you very much indeed. A reminder that you can follow myself, Tristan, and the F1 in Review account on Twitter, F1 in Review, all one word, no spaces or gaps there whatsoever. And we remain in the summer break, and if there is some more news regarding the few more seats that have to be filled and the tying up of all those loose ends, we'll no doubt be talking about that very soon. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.